He was the half-god in leather pants the world couldn't stop watching. Hercules, The Legendary Journeys was one of the biggest syndicated shows of the 1990s. It aired in over 170 countries, made Kevin Sorbo one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, and it left a trail of drama that continues on 3 decades later. From casting changes to a secret illness that left the show dangling by a thread, to the spin-off that created a whole lot of bad blood, this is the rise, the hidden drama, and the impressive but complicated legacy of Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. Now before we start, give this video a like if you watched Hercules back in the day, and subscribe for more retro TV deep dives. Let's go all the way back to the early 90s and the world of made-for-TV movies. Universal Television was running a syndicated block called the Action Pack, a rotating group of 2-hour TV movies that independent stations across the country could pick up and air on weekends. They had Vanishing Son, they had the William Shatner sci-fi vehicle Tech War, but they needed more content to fill it out. So Universal approached Rob Tapert and Sam Raimi to create TV movies about Hercules. Their production company, Renaissance Pictures, was responsible for the Evil Dead movies with Bruce Campbell, as well as Darkman and the film they were working on at the time, Hard Target, with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So yeah, they knew a thing or two about making action movies, but they wanted to expand into television, so they said yes. And they had the perfect Hercules in mind. Dolph Lundgren. Dolph was fresh off Rocky IV, internationally known, tall, muscular, fit the prototypical Hercules to a T. They made him a big offer and he turned it down. Then they offered the role to Robert Chapin, who was fresh off his work on the action film Ring of Steel, and he turned it down because he thought the script was atrocious. So they decided to change everything. You see, at that point, every version of Hercules had been defined by muscle. Steve Reeves in the 1958 Italian movie, Lou Ferrigno in the early 80s, these guys solved problems by lifting things and throwing them. As Raimi said in a 1995 interview, "We decided to make Hercules an American and a regular guy who wasn't necessarily a musclehead. Less Hulk, more Joe Montana." And during what was a long casting process, one actor stood out: Kevin Sorbo. Sorbo was 34 at the time and was a relative unknown, but had been around the block, so to speak. He traveled the world in the 80s, had done over 150 commercials, and spent years doing guest spots on shows like Cheers and Murder, She Wrote. But he had never gotten a starring role, even though he came close a few times. In 1993, he was one of the finalists for Superman in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which he lost out to Dean Cain. He was also a contender for Fox Mulder in The X-Files, which of course went to David Duchovny. But the third time would be the charm. He perfectly fit the job description of the kind of regular good guy you could have a beer with. And so he landed the role. And here's another casting what if. The role of Hercules' father, Zeus, was first offered to Charlton Heston, who of course was already world famous from his roles in Moses and Ben-Hur, but he passed as well. So that role ended up going to Anthony Quinn. The role of Hercules' sidekick Aeolus went to Michael Hirst, who was at the time one of the most respected Shakespearean actors in New Zealand, known for playing the fool in King Lear and Twelfth Night. He was simultaneously directing a production of Hamlet during the early Hercules movies. Busy guy. The first film, Hercules and the Amazon Women, aired in April 1994. The other 4 movies followed through November, and the ratings were strong enough that Universal decided to turn it into a full weekly series. That was a big deal because at the time, sword and sandal fantasy adventures were considered too risky and too expensive for weekly television. But the 5 TV movies proved otherwise. Not only did they allow Tapert and Raimi to find the right tone and blend of monster suits, stunts, and CGI, and build a real audience in the process, they also locked in something that would shape television and film going forward: a production pipeline in New Zealand. It was cheaper, faster, and more flexible than anything Hollywood could offer, and opened the door to a lot more productions. More on that in a bit. Hercules, The Legendary Journeys premiered January 16, 1995. By July, just 6 months in, it had climbed to number 1 in weekly syndication rankings, passing Baywatch in some markets, which had been the undisputed king of syndication action TV for years. The most watched syndicated series in the world, not too shabby. But critics did not like it. Entertainment Weekly called it one of the most self-aware junk television shows, but viewers worldwide loved it. Every week, more than 100 million people were watching Hercules fight monsters in woven leather pants that, sidebar, wore out every 2 to 3 days and took multiple craftsmen 6 to 7 days to make. And the show just kept building. Through seasons 2, 3, and 4, the Hercules world kept expanding. Kevin Smith, no, not Silent Bob, played Ares, the charming, self-satisfied god of war who became the show's best recurring villain. Bruce Campbell, famous from Evil Dead, played Autolycus, the king of thieves, and directed 7 episodes during the run. And a young Carl Urban, who would later be Bones in Star Trek, played Cupid and Julius Caesar before anyone had any idea who he was. But one of Hercules' villains was about to become something much, much bigger. Her name was Xena. In the 13th episode of Season 1, she appeared as a warlord named Xena, warrior princess, who seduced Aeolus to get close enough to kill Hercules. And here's another casting what if. Xena's role was originally cast to British actress Vanessa Angel, but she got the flu and couldn't fly to New Zealand. Crazy. Anyway, Xena was supposed to die at the end of her 3-episode arc, but when Tappert saw the dailies from the first episode, he called it immediately. They were doing a spinoff. They changed the 3rd episode so Xena survived, and Xena Warrior Princess premiered in September of 1995. By Xena's 2nd season, it had passed Hercules in the ratings, and it stayed ahead for every single year both shows were on the air. And Sorbo didn't like it. Apparently, resources started flowing toward the new show, directors he'd worked with for years were suddenly unavailable, and resentment was a-brewing. More on that in a minute. But a bigger problem was developing behind the scenes that almost changed the show and Sorbo's life dramatically. In the summer of 1997, Sorbo was on a publicity tour for his film Call the Conqueror. He started feeling pain, tingling, and cold sensations in his left arm and hand. Multiple doctors told him it wasn't serious, so he kept working out. Then, after a visit to a chiropractor, the situation became critical. He drove home with blurry vision and dizziness. The next morning, his speech was slurred and he could barely walk, so he went to the hospital. Doctors found an aneurysm in an artery near his shoulder that had been producing blood clots. An MRI confirmed he had suffered 3 separate strokes. He spent weeks in the hospital and months in rehabilitation. He later said it took 2 full years before he began to feel like himself again. And here's the thing. Almost nobody knew about it. The condition was kept completely secret from the public. Sorbo worked reduced hours, sometimes only a couple of hours a day on set. Scripts were rewritten around his limitations. Stunt doubles covered his physical scenes. More guest stars were brought in to carry episodes. The man playing the world's strongest character couldn't lift 10 pounds. The show even started writing around his absence in ways that, looking back, are equal parts clever and dark. There's an episode called Yes, Virginia, There Is a Hercules, where the fictional writer's room panics because Kevin Sorbo has gone missing. The next episode, Porcules, has Hercules magically transformed into a pig. Both were written specifically because Sorbo couldn't be on set. The show was literally making light of the fact that its star had vanished. When Sorbo was asked later on why he kept the strokes a secret, he said simply, "I didn't want people to know because of ego, fear." He didn't reveal the full story publicly until his 2011 autobiography. And oh boy, did he ever share how he really felt. More on that in a minute. Now, even with Sorbo's health struggles, the show was still popular, but yet another problem was brewing. Because season 1 had only been 13 episodes instead of the standard 22, Sorbo's contract was out of sync with the season count. Going into season 6, he technically had exactly 8 episodes remaining on his deal. Universal and Renaissance Pictures offered him a 3-year extension, and he turned it down. He had already committed to the lead role in Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, and after 6 years on the show, the last 2 spent fighting through a hidden health crisis, he was kinda done. Now, in his autobiography, he said he was willing to do a full 6th season. The producers chose not to take him up on it. They had 2 new shows ready to take over the time slot, Cleopatra 2525 and Jack of All Trades, and there was no incentive to fight for more Hercules. Rob Tappert ended season 6 the moment Sorbo's 8 contracted episodes were in the can. Hercules, The Legendary Journeys aired its final episode on November 2nd, 1999. Xena continued for another year and a half, ending in June 2001 with 134 episodes. But this was far from the end for Sorbo and Lawless, especially in the press. 2 years after Hercules ended, Sorbo gave an interview to SFX magazine, and he didn't hold back about his feelings about Xena. He complained that Xena had taken his directors, half his writing staff, and half his crew. He said he was stabbed in the back. He also criticized the show for what he called its lack of family values, but he was just getting started. In 2007, he gave an interview to Film Stew and this time went right at Lucy Lawless. He claimed she only got a small part in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man because she was with Tappert, implying nepotism. Then in 2010, in a Black Book magazine interview, he dropped even more bombs. He implied Lawless might be a closeted lesbian, and he suggested she'd gotten the Xena role in the first place by seducing Tappert. Lawless mostly let this stuff go, but in January 2021, she broke her silence when Sorbo tweeted about the January 6 events at the Capitol. So if there was any illusion of civility between the two camps, it was gone. For two characters who became the ultimate 1-2 syndication punch, it was clear the bad blood, especially from Sorbo's side, lived on for decades. Now, despite Lawless being told she didn't earn her jobs, she became a legend. In addition to doing Broadway, playing Betty Rizzo in the 1997 revival of Grease, she did Battlestar Galactica, Spartacus, and Ash vs. Evil Dead. She remains, by almost universal consensus, the most beloved figure to come out of the entire Hercules Xena universe. Michael Hurst transitioned into directing, including episodes of Spartacus and Ash vs. Evil Dead. Sam Raimi went on to direct the Spider-Man trilogy, which featured Lucy Lawless, Bruce Campbell, and Ted Raimi in cameos. It was basically a Hercules reunion. But Hercules had a much bigger impact than just spawning careers. Before Hercules, it was widely believed that sword and sandal fantasy shows were too expensive, too risky, and lacked mainstream appeal. Hercules completely broke that stigma, and almost immediately, other television networks rushed to create their own campy, action-heavy adaptations of classic folk heroes: The Adventures of Sinbad, The New Adventures of Robin Hood, Conan the Adventurer, Tarzan the Epic Adventures, Beastmaster. It also spawned Young Hercules, which at the time starred a relative unknown Canadian kid named Ryan Gosling. Now, the real ones out there will remember him from Breaker High, which I'm guilty of watching after school back in the day, but this was his big break. He's been a Hollywood A-lister ever since. And then, of course, I've got to call out the New Zealand production pipeline they built. Because of the infrastructure Tappert and Raimi built, the studio facilities, local stunt talent, and experienced technical crews, Peter Jackson was able to convince New Line Cinema to shoot The Lord of the Rings entirely in New Zealand. And more broadly, Hercules was one of the first major syndication hits to rely on CGI, green screens, and high-flying martial arts choreography, making TV more cinematic. And the choice to make Hercules more approachable and humorous, that influenced other action heroes like Xena, which in turn influenced other shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Hercules was never loved by critics, but when you add it all up, it left quite a mark on entertainment. If you enjoyed this deep dive, like the video and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.